While a body of archaeological evidence supports the historical validity of the Exodus, speculation still surrounds the true identity of the Pharaoh responsible for the Hebrews' bondage and flight from Egypt. Not surprisingly, there are no helpful clues in Egypt's often self-serving historical records. Nor is the Pharaoh of the Exodus mentioned by name anywhere in the Old Testament accounts. However, despite the lack of direct evidence, scholars continue their attempts to define the key personalities of the Exodus narrative. And during the past century, two conflicting theories have emerged. They are based on what is now known as the early and late dates of the Exodus. Supporters of the late chronology usually identify Ramesses the Great as the Pharaoh who enslaved Israel. The basis for this theory is found in the Old Testament.
So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor, and they built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses.
Although there were several Egyptian kings named Ramesses, Ramesses II is most often tied to the accounts of the Israelites' bondage. The reasons are obvious. At the time of Ramesses' birth, in roughly 1304 BC, the period now called the 19th dynasty, Egypt was at the peak of her glory. Ramesses ascended the throne in 1290 BC with a vision to expand his nation's borders. He decided to move his capital from the ancient city of Thebes to the northeastern Nile Delta. There he built a new royal city and called it Pi-Ramesses. Some historians have reasoned that because the name Pi-Ramesses was similar to the city identified in the Old Testament, Ramesses II must have been the pharaoh who enslaved the Hebrews as his workforce. Yet recent archaeological discoveries now reveal that Ramesses II may have actually built his capital and renamed it in his honor on the foundations of a city that had been constructed by Israelite hands at least 300 years earlier. Centuries later, ancient scribes who copied the first written documents of the Exodus account probably used Pi-Ramesses, the newer, more familiar name of the city, in their transcriptions. But if popular interpretations, including Cecil B. DeMille's epic film depicting Ramesses as Pharaoh of the Exodus, are incorrect, then which Egyptian ruler actually confronted Moses and his God? Many believe the answer is linked directly to another Old Testament passage.
Now it came about in the 480th year, after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, that he began to build the house of the Lord.
Most historians agree that Solomon commenced building the temple in Jerusalem in 965 BC. According to the scriptures, this construction began 480 years after the Exodus. That means the biblical date of Israel's departure from Egypt is approximately 1445 BC, more than a century before Ramses II was born. This early date for the Exodus, 1445 BC, is supported by numerous archaeological discoveries. And if it is accurate, an intriguing scenario involving Moses and some of Egypt's most illustrious rulers takes shape. 1445 BC would mean the Exodus occurred in the middle of Egypt's 18th dynasty. This was a period when the great shrines of Karnak, Luxor, and Deir el-Bahari rose majestically near the banks of the Nile. Within this chronology, Moses would have been born during the reign of Thutmoses I, a warrior king who helped make Egypt an imperial power. Thutmoses had a daughter named Hatshepsut. Some scholars have speculated she could have rescued the infant Moses from the Nile and raised him as her son. The very name Moses is of Egyptian derivation. Early in the 15th century BC, Hatshepsut, now herself ruler of Egypt, was locked in a vicious battle for power with her stepson, Thutmoses III. Thutmoses ultimately took control of the empire, and erased the images of Hatshepsut from the monuments she had erected. His hatred for Hatshepsut was perhaps intensified by knowledge she had rescued and raised Moses with the hope he would one day succeed her as Pharaoh. Thutmoses III was a ruthless conqueror and may well have been Pharaoh during the peak of the Israelites' oppression. Some scholars have speculated that he also pursued the Israelites into the Red Sea, for the length of Thutmoses' reign and the date of his death coincide almost perfectly with the early biblical chronology. Was Thutmoses III the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Today, a scarcity of direct archaeological evidence and confusion over precise dating of Egyptian dynasties make it difficult to conclusively identify the Egyptian rulers who shaped the destiny of Moses and his people. Yet while these chapters of antiquity may never be completely defined, one thing is certain: the glory of Egypt's pharaohs has long faded into the desert sands. But accounts of Moses and his faith still endure and inspire after 3,500 years.